Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. A journey begins with high hopes. The Atlanta International Airport was alive with its usual symphony of activity, a ceaseless rhythm of rolling luggage, hurried footsteps, and a chorus of announcements echoing through the terminal. Among the crowd, a striking pair stood out, a tall, distinguished black man in an impeccably tailored suit and a bright-eyed little girl skipping beside him, her pink backpack bouncing with every step. "Look, Daddy. That's our plane," the little girl exclaimed, pointing excitedly to a gleaming white aircraft parked at the gate. Marcus Carter smiled down at his 7-year-old daughter, Aaliyah, his heart warmed by her enthusiasm. "That's right, sweetheart," he said, gently squeezing her hand. His deep voice was calm, but his mind was racing, partially occupied by the upcoming business meeting that had prompted this last-minute flight. Despite his demanding role as CEO of one of the nation's leading airlines, Marcus always made time for Aaliyah, his only child and his greatest joy. Aaliyah, with her dark, bouncy curls and an infectious smile, was the picture of excitement. This was a rare treat, traveling with her father on a business trip during her school break. The trip had been her idea, and Marcus, eager to make up for lost time after weeks of back-to-back meetings, had relented. He'd promised her an adventure, but he couldn't have predicted the events that would soon unfold. As they approached the priority boarding line, Marcus crouched down to Aaliyah's level, his tone serious yet tender. "Remember what we talked about?" Aaliyah nodded solemnly, her curls bouncing. "Best behavior, inside voice, and no jumping on the seats, even if they're super bouncy." Marcus chuckled, adjusting the collar of her yellow dress. "That's my girl. And what do you do if you need something?" "I ask the flight attendant politely," Aaliyah recited, her voice filled with pride at remembering all the rules. Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with love. "Perfect. You're going to do great, sweetheart." As they approached the gate, passengers turned to look. Some recognized Marcus, their eyes widening at the sight of the airline CEO. Others admired the heartwarming image of a father and daughter, hand in hand. Marcus, ever modest, maintained his focus on Aaliyah. At the gate, they were greeted by Captain Phillips, a seasoned pilot with a warm demeanor. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," he said, extending a hand. "It's an honor to have you aboard today." "The honor is mine, Captain," Marcus replied, shaking his hand firmly. "This is my daughter, Aaliyah." Aaliyah gave a small curtsy, making both men smile. "It's nice to meet you, Captain." "The pleasure is all mine, young lady," the captain said, tipping his hat playfully. "I hope you enjoy your flight." As they boarded the plane, a flight attendant with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and a practiced smile stepped forward to greet them. Her name tag read Marie. "Welcome aboard," she said, her voice sweet but with an undertone Aaliyah couldn't quite place. Marcus gestured to their seats in the first-class cabin. "We're in 2A and 2B. Marie, I need a favor. I'll be heading to economy to take care of some business during the flight. Could you keep an eye on my daughter?" Marie's smile widened, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, sir. We'll take excellent care of her." She turned to Aaliyah, her tone shifting to one that felt slightly condescending. "Aren't you lucky to be flying in first class today?" Aaliyah shifted closer to her father, sensing something uncomfortable in Marie's tone. Marcus, distracted by an incoming text, missed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. "Thank you, Marie," he said, placing Aaliyah's pink backpack under her seat and handing her Mr. Trunks, her beloved stuffed elephant. "Sweetheart, I'll check on you as soon as I can. If you need anything, just ask Marie, okay?" "Okay, Daddy," Aaliyah said softly, clutching Mr. Trunks tightly. Marcus kissed her forehead and gave her one last reassuring smile before heading to the economy cabin. He glanced back once, his heart heavy with guilt for leaving her alone, even for a short time. As soon as Marcus was out of sight, Marie's demeanor changed. The warm smile vanished, replaced by a cold, disapproving expression. "Stay in your seat and don't cause any trouble," she said curtly before walking away. Aaliyah's small face crumpled in confusion. She clutched Mr. Trunks tighter, unsure of what she had done to deserve such treatment. The plane filled quickly, and soon the safety demonstration began. Aaliyah tried to catch Marie's eye during the presentation, hoping to ask for the water her father had promised, but Marie deliberately avoided looking in her direction. As the plane roared down the runway and took off, Aaliyah's ears began to hurt. Remembering her father's advice, she swallowed hard, but it didn't help. Summoning her courage, she pressed the call button. Marie appeared moments later, her face tight with annoyance. "What? May I please have some water?" Aaliyah asked, her voice small. "Service hasn't started yet." "You'll have to wait," Marie snapped, switching off the call button and walking away without another word. Aaliyah fought back tears, her excitement from earlier in the day replaced by confusion and sadness. She had followed her father's rules, used her manners, and yet she felt as though she had done something wrong. The businessman across the aisle noticed the interaction and frowned. "Excuse me," he called to Marie. "I think you missed this young lady." Marie's fake smile returned instantly. "Oh, I'll be taking care of her separately, as arranged with her father." The lie rolled smoothly off her tongue, and the businessman nodded, satisfied. Aaliyah sat quietly, her small hands clutching Mr. Trunks as she stared out the window at the clouds. She didn't understand why Marie was treating her this way, but she told herself to be brave. Her father had taught her to always hold her head high, no matter what. But as the minutes turned into hours, Aaliyah's resilience would be tested in ways she never imagined. The flight had settled into its steady rhythm, with the hum of the engines creating a constant backdrop to the quiet conversations and soft clinking of glasses in the first-class cabin. Aaliyah sat in her seat, staring out the window, trying to distract herself from the gnawing ache in her stomach and the chill that had settled over her. She hugged Mr. Trunks tightly, her small fingers brushing the soft fabric of her stuffed elephant. Her earlier excitement had long faded, replaced by a growing sense of unease. She missed her father and wished he would return soon. Marie continued her duties, but it was clear to Aaliyah that the flight attendant was avoiding her. Each time she tried to catch Marie's attention, she was met with a cold, dismissive glance. Aaliyah had never encountered someone who seemed to dislike her so much, and she couldn't understand why. She had always been taught to be polite and kind, and she thought she had done everything right. Yet, Marie's behavior made her feel small and unwelcome, a stark contrast to the warmth she usually experienced with her father and those around him. As the meal service began, the tantalizing aroma of warm food wafted through the cabin. Aaliyah's stomach growled loudly, causing her to blush in embarrassment. She watched as Marie moved gracefully through the aisles, delivering meals to the other passengers with a practiced smile. Aaliyah's eyes followed the cart, her hope rising as it approached her row. But when Marie reached her seat, she bypassed Aaliyah entirely, moving on to the next passenger without so much as a glance in her direction. Aaliyah hesitated, unsure whether to speak up. Her father had always told her to use her voice when she needed something, but Marie's icy demeanor made her feel nervous. Summoning her courage, she whispered, "Excuse me, may I please have something to eat?" Marie stopped in her tracks, turning slowly to face Aaliyah. Her smile was gone, replaced by a look of annoyance. "Your father didn't pre-order a children's meal for you," she said curtly. "We don't have any extras." This was another lie. Aaliyah didn't know that her father had specifically arranged for her meal, trusting the airline to take care of her. But the way Marie spoke made Aaliyah feel as though she had done something wrong. She nodded quietly and turned her attention back to the window, her appetite overshadowed by a lump forming in her throat. The elderly woman seated behind Aaliyah had been observing the interaction. Her kind eyes filled with concern as she cleared her throat to get Marie's attention. "Excuse me," she said gently. "I'm not very hungry today. Perhaps this young lady could have my meal instead?" Marie's expression hardened, but she maintained her professional facade. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said with a tight smile. "It's against company policy to transfer meals between passengers." Another lie. The woman frowned but didn't press the issue, her gaze lingering on Aaliyah with sympathy. Aaliyah, sensing the woman's kindness, gave her a small, grateful smile, before turning back to the window. She didn't want anyone to see the tears that were threatening to spill over. Time seemed to crawl as Aaliyah sat quietly in her seat, her stomach growling and her heart heavy. The once exciting flight had become a test of her patience and resilience. She tried to distract herself by looking at the clouds outside, imagining shapes and stories in their fluffy forms. But even her vivid imagination couldn't keep the discomfort at bay. The cabin grew colder as the flight progressed, and Aaliyah pulled her arms around herself for warmth. She shivered slightly, wishing she had brought a sweater. Gathering her courage once more, she pressed the call button. Marie appeared almost immediately, her expression exasperated. "What now?" she snapped. "I'm cold," Aaliyah said softly. "May I please have a blanket?" Marie rolled her eyes and walked away without a word. A moment later, she returned with a blanket wrapped in plastic. Instead of handing it to Aaliyah, she tossed it onto her lap with a muttered, "Here." Aaliyah's small hands struggled to open the plastic wrapping. She could feel Marie's eyes on her, but the flight attendant made no move to help. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aaliyah managed to unwrap the blanket and draped it over herself and Mr. Trunks. The thin fabric did little to warm her, but she held on to it tightly, as if it could shield her from the coldness of Marie's attitude. The minutes stretched into hours, and Aaliyah felt the weight of her isolation more acutely with each passing moment. She needed to use the bathroom, but was afraid to press the call button again. Finally, unable to wait any longer, she unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. Almost immediately, Marie appeared, her eyes narrowing as she approached. "Where do you think you're going?" she demanded. "I need to use the bathroom," Aaliyah replied quietly. Marie pointed to the seatbelt sign, which was off. "Next time, wait for me to escort you. We can't have children running around the cabin unsupervised," she said sharply. Without waiting for a response, Marie grabbed Aaliyah's arm and marched her to the bathroom at the front of the cabin. Her grip was firm, and Aaliyah winced slightly as she stumbled to keep up. When they reached the bathroom, Marie released her arm with enough force to make her stumble slightly. "Make it quick," Marie snapped, before walking away. Inside the tiny bathroom, Aaliyah rubbed her arm where Marie had grabbed her. A faint red mark lingered on her skin, a reminder of the rough treatment. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, her wide eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. She didn't want to cry. Her father had always told her to be strong, but at that moment, she felt anything but. When she emerged from the bathroom, Marie was waiting, her arms crossed and her foot tapping impatiently. "Took you long enough," she muttered, practically pushing Aaliyah back toward her seat. "Stay there and don't move again without permission." Aaliyah sank into her seat, clutching Mr. Trunks tightly. She buried her face in his soft fur, wishing she could disappear. She tried to focus on the comforting thought that her father would return soon. He always made everything better. But as the hours dragged on, her hope began to waver. The businessman across the aisle had been observing Marie's behavior and was growing increasingly uncomfortable. He leaned over and spoke softly to Aaliyah. "Are you okay, young lady?" Aaliyah nodded quickly, not wanting to cause any trouble. But her red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands betrayed her true feelings. The man frowned, his concern deepening. He resolved to speak to Marcus as soon as he saw him. Meanwhile, in the economy cabin, Marcus was wrapping up his meeting. He checked his watch and realized it had been far too long since he had checked on Aaliyah. Guilt pricked at his conscience as he gathered his papers and made his way toward the front of the plane. When Marcus entered the first-class cabin, the sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Aaliyah was huddled in her seat, her small frame wrapped in a blanket, her face turned toward the window. She looked so small, so vulnerable, that Marcus's heart clenched. He approached her quickly, kneeling beside her seat. "Aaliyah," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" At the sound of her father's voice, Aaliyah turned to him, her eyes filling with tears. She launched herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest. Marcus held her tightly, his heart breaking at her distress. what happened?" he asked softly, his tone laced with concern. Aaliyah hesitated, not wanting to get anyone in trouble. But the floodgates had opened, and the words spilled out. She told him about the missed meal, the rough treatment, and the coldness she had endured from Marie. Marcus listened in silence, his jaw tightening with each detail. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat, catching Marcus's attention. "Mr. Carter, I've been watching what's been happening, and I must say, it's unacceptable. Your daughter has been treated horribly." Marcus's eyes darkened, and he stood slowly, his protective instincts kicking in. He turned to Marie, who was standing at the front of the cabin, her face pale as she realized what was happening. "Marie," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to have a conversation." Marie's composure faltered as Marcus stepped toward her. The passengers watched in silence, sensing the tension in the air. Marcus was determined to get to the bottom of what had happened and ensure that no child, or anyone, would ever be treated this way again. Aaliyah deserved better, and Marcus would stop at nothing to make it right. Marcus stood before Marie, his imposing presence a stark contrast to her suddenly diminished composure. The quiet intensity in his eyes made the air around them feel heavy, and the surrounding passengers watched silently, their curiosity mingled with a palpable tension. Aaliyah sat in her seat, clutching Mr. Trunks tightly, her wide eyes glancing between her father and the flight attendant. She didn't know exactly what her father was going to say or do, but she knew he would stand up for her. "Marie," Marcus began, his voice calm but laced with unmistakable authority, "I'd like to have a word with you regarding the way you've been treating my daughter." Marie's smile, which she had managed to hold on to despite the growing discomfort, faltered completely. "Mr. Carter," she started, her voice trembling slightly, "I assure you, I've been doing my best to provide excellent service." "Stop," Marcus interrupted, his tone sharp yet controlled. "There's no need for excuses. My daughter has shared with me how you've treated her since I left her in your care. Denying her meals, responding to her politely made requests with disdain, physically handling her roughly, all of it is unacceptable." Marie opened her mouth to speak, but Marcus held up a hand, silencing her. His voice lowered, but the intensity of his words seemed to amplify. "Do you know what the role of a flight attendant is, Marie? It's not just about serving drinks and putting on a smile for the passengers you think deserve it. Your job is to ensure the safety, comfort, and dignity of every single person on this plane, regardless of their age, background, or circumstances. You have failed spectacularly in that duty." Marie's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and frustration. "Mr. Carter, I didn't mean to." Marcus took a step closer, his towering figure casting a shadow over her. "Didn't mean to what?" "Didn't mean to treat my 7-year-old daughter as though she didn't belong here? Didn't mean to single her out because she had the audacity to ask for basic kindness? Tell me, Marie, what exactly didn't you mean to do?" The other passengers exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others whispering among themselves. The businessman who had spoken up earlier cleared his throat and stood, addressing Marcus directly. "Mr. Carter," he said, his tone respectful, "I can vouch for what your daughter has experienced. I saw it all." This flight attendant ignored her, spoke to her in a demeaning manner, and refused her simple requests. It was troubling to witness. Another passenger, the elderly woman who had tried to offer Aaliyah her meal, added her voice to the growing chorus. "I offered my food to your daughter because she was clearly hungry, but Marie refused to let her have it. It's not just unkind, it's cruel." Marie's face turned a deep shade of red as the testimonies mounted. She stammered, I didn't realize." Marcus's expression hardened. "You didn't realize? That's not good enough. If you can't recognize when a child is being mistreated under your watch, then you have no business being in this profession." At that moment, the captain emerged from the cockpit, alerted by the escalating situation. Captain Phillips, a seasoned professional with a calm demeanor, quickly assessed the scene. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but firm. Marcus turned to the captain, his posture commanding but respectful. "Captain, I apologize for the disruption, but this matter needed to be addressed immediately. Your flight attendant, Marie, has mistreated my daughter throughout this flight. As the CEO of this airline, I find her behavior unacceptable and incompatible with the values we stand for. The captain's eyes widened slightly as he registered who Marcus was. He nodded, his expression grave. I understand, Mr. Carter. I assure you, we take these matters very seriously. Marie, step forward. Marie hesitated, her hands trembling as she stepped closer to the captain. He looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and authority. Marie, is what Mr. Carter and these passengers are saying true? Marie stammered, unable to form a coherent response. The captain sighed deeply and turned back to Marcus. Mr. Carter, on behalf of the crew, I sincerely apologize for this incident. We will conduct a full investigation, and I assure you, appropriate actions will be taken. Marcus nodded, his expression softening slightly. Thank you, Captain. For now, I'd like to sit with my daughter and ensure she feels safe and cared for during the remainder of this flight. Of course, the captain said. He gestured to another flight attendant, a kind-looking woman named Clara, who stepped forward immediately. Clara, please see to it that Mr. Carter and his daughter are attended to for the rest of the flight. Clara nodded, her face filled with genuine concern. Absolutely, Captain. She turned to Marcus and Aaliyah with a warm smile. Mr. Carter, Miss Aaliyah, is there anything I can get you right now? Marcus looked down at Aaliyah, who was still clutching Mr. Trunks tightly. Sweetheart, would you like something to eat or drink? Aaliyah looked up at Clara, her eyes hesitant but hopeful. May I please have some water and maybe something to eat? Clara's smile widened. Of course, sweetheart. I'll bring you something right away. She disappeared into the galley and returned moments later with a tray of food and a bottle of water, setting it gently on Aaliyah's tray table. Aaliyah's eyes lit up as she whispered, "Thank you." Marcus sat beside her, his large frame somehow fitting into the first-class seat with ease. He leaned over and spoke softly. I'm sorry you had to go through that, sweetheart. No one should ever treat you that way, and I promise I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Aaliyah nodded, her small hand resting on his. I'm okay now, Daddy. Thank you for coming back. As Aaliyah ate, Marcus glanced around the cabin. The passengers were still watching, some offering him nods of encouragement. He felt a mixture of gratitude and responsibility. His role as CEO wasn't just about running a business, it was about ensuring that every passenger, every employee, and every child like Aaliyah was treated with dignity and respect. When the plane finally landed, Marcus stood, helping Aaliyah gather her things. The businessman and the elderly woman approached him, both expressing their admiration for how he had handled the situation. Marcus thanked them sincerely, his heart swelling with pride for the support they had shown his daughter. As they exited the plane, Marcus held Aaliyah's hand tightly. The incident had been a painful reminder of the challenges they faced, but it also reinforced his commitment to teaching his daughter the importance of standing up for herself and others. Together, they walked through the bustling airport, their bond stronger than ever. The story of what had happened on that flight quickly spread, sparking conversations about the importance of kindness, professionalism, and the impact of standing up against injustice. For Marcus and Aaliyah, it was a moment that would forever shape their journey, one that reminded them of the power of resilience, love, and the courage to demand better. The story of the incident aboard the flight did not end once Marcus and Aaliyah stepped off the plane. In fact, it was only the beginning of a larger conversation that would ripple far beyond the confines of that single aircraft. As they walked through the airport hand in hand, Aaliyah still clutching Mr. Trunks, Marcus's mind raced. His heart was heavy with the weight of what his daughter had endured, but his determination to address the situation was unshakable. Marcus had built his career and reputation on a foundation of fairness and inclusivity. As the CEO of the airline, he had always believed in creating a company culture that valued every individual, regardless of their background. The events of the flight had not only hurt his daughter but also highlighted a glaring issue within the organization he had worked so hard to lead. As they approached the exit, Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from the airline's public relations team, who had already caught wind of the incident through passenger accounts on social media. Several posts had gone viral, detailing the mistreatment of a young girl in first class, with mentions of Marcus himself as the child's father. The posts were accompanied by photos taken by passengers, showing Aaliyah sitting quietly in her seat, her face pressed against the window, and Marie's visibly indifferent demeanor. The PR team was asking for guidance on how to handle the growing public outcry. Marcus sighed, his frustration mounting. He had hoped to address the matter internally before it became a media storm, but it seemed the story was already out of his control. For a moment, he considered brushing it aside, dealing with it privately as a family matter. But then he glanced down at Aaliyah, who was looking up at him with trust and love in her eyes. This wasn't just about her, it was about ensuring that no other child, no other passenger, would have to endure what she had. Once they reached their hotel, Marcus tucked Aaliyah into bed, staying with her until her breathing slowed and she drifted into sleep. He kissed her forehead softly, vowing to protect her with everything he had. Then, he settled into the desk in the corner of the room, opening his laptop to draft a statement. If the story was going public, he would make sure it served as a catalyst for change. The next morning, Marcus issued a heartfelt and powerful statement through the airline's official channels. He began by apologizing personally to his daughter and any other passengers who may have felt uncomfortable or overlooked during the flight. He acknowledged the incident without sugarcoating it, describing how it had deeply impacted him both as a father and as a leader. He emphasized the importance of accountability, vowing to conduct a thorough investigation into the actions of the flight attendant and to implement changes to prevent such behavior in the future. "We are not merely an airline," his statement read. "We are a company that carries people's dreams, hopes, and lives in our hands every day. Every passenger deserves to feel valued and respected, and every employee must embody the values of kindness and professionalism that we strive for. To my daughter, Aaliyah, and to every child who looks to the adults in their lives for guidance, I promise we will do better." The statement was accompanied by a detailed outline of the steps the airline planned to take, including enhanced training for employees on diversity, equity, and inclusion, a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, and the establishment of a task force to review and improve customer service protocols. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The airline's social media accounts were flooded with messages of support and outrage, with many praising Marcus for his transparency and leadership. Parents shared their own stories of traveling with children, while others called for systemic change within the airline industry as a whole. The story became a national talking point, covered by major news outlets and sparking discussions about racism, implicit bias, and the treatment of children in professional settings. Back at the airline's headquarters, Marcus convened an emergency meeting with his executive team. The atmosphere in the room was tense as he outlined his vision for the future. "This is not just about damage control," he said firmly. "This is about redefining who we are and what we stand for. We will not tolerate any behavior that undermines our commitment to respect and dignity. This is our opportunity to lead by example." The investigation into Marie's actions was swift and thorough. Interviews with passengers and crew members confirmed Aaliyah's account, as well as the additional testimonies of those who had witnessed the mistreatment. It became clear that Marie's behavior was not an isolated incident but part of a pattern of conduct that had gone unchecked for far too long. As a result, Marie's employment with the airline was terminated. The announcement was made publicly, accompanied by a reiteration of the airline's commitment to holding all employees to the highest ethical standards. But Marcus didn't stop there. He recognized that firing one person would not solve the underlying issues. He partnered with experts in diversity and inclusion to develop a comprehensive training program for all employees, from flight attendants to executives. The program focused on recognizing and addressing implicit biases, fostering empathy, and creating a more inclusive environment for passengers and staff alike. He also established a mentorship initiative within the airline, aimed at supporting employees from underrepresented backgrounds and ensuring they had access to growth and leadership opportunities. The initiative was named Aaliyah's Promise, inspired by his daughter's strength and resilience. Meanwhile, Aaliyah was adjusting to the sudden attention the story had brought to her life. At school, her classmates and teachers treated her with a mix of admiration and curiosity. She found it strange to be at the center of so much discussion, but her father helped her navigate the experience with grace. He reminded her that their story had the power to inspire others and create change, and she took comfort in knowing that her ordeal had led to something meaningful. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Aaliyah asked, "Daddy, why was she so mean to me? Did I do something wrong?" Marcus's heart ached at the question, but he answered her honestly. "No, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes, people make choices based on their own fears or misunderstandings, and it's not fair. But what's important is that we don't let their behavior define how we see ourselves. You are kind, brave, and worthy of respect, and no one can take that away from you." Aaliyah nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you think she'll ever be nicer to other kids?" "I hope so," Marcus said. "Sometimes, when people are held accountable for their actions, it helps them grow. And if this story can help even one person change for the better, then it was worth telling." As the months went by, the airline began to see the fruits of Marcus's efforts. Passenger satisfaction scores improved, employee morale increased, and the company received recognition for its commitment to social responsibility. The story of the flight and the changes it had inspired became a case study in leadership and accountability, taught in business schools and discussed in boardrooms. For Marcus and Aaliyah, life eventually returned to a new kind of normal. They continued to travel together, their bond stronger than ever. Each time they boarded a plane, Marcus made sure to look into Aaliyah's eyes and remind her of her worth. And each time, Aaliyah carried Mr. Trunks with her, a small but powerful reminder of the journey they had shared and the lessons they had learned. Their story became more than just a tale of adversity. It became a testament to the power of standing up for what's right, the importance of kindness, and the enduring strength of love between a father and his daughter. The ripple effects of the incident on that flight continued to extend far and wide, shaping not only Marcus's airline but also the conversations happening across industries, families, and communities. As Marcus worked tirelessly to implement the changes he had promised, he became acutely aware that the lessons from this experience went beyond the realm of business. They touched on the deeply human need for compassion, the responsibility of leadership, and the courage required to confront systemic issues. At home, Aaliyah seemed to have adjusted well after the ordeal. She resumed her normal activities, attending school, playing with her friends, and enjoying her favorite hobbies. Yet, there were subtle shifts in her demeanor that Marcus couldn't ignore. She asked more questions about the world around her, about fairness, about why some people treated others differently. Marcus took these moments as opportunities to teach her, gently guiding her understanding of complex issues while always reassuring her of her inherent worth and the importance of kindness. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Aaliyah brought up something that had been weighing on her mind. "Daddy," she began hesitantly, "do you think Miss Marie feels bad about what happened?" Marcus paused, setting down the book he'd been reading. He looked at his daughter, her wide, curious eyes filled with a mixture of innocence and wisdom. "I think it's possible," he said carefully. "When people are held accountable for their actions, it gives them a chance to reflect and grow. But whether she feels bad or not, what's important is that we've done everything we can to make sure it doesn't happen again, to you or anyone else." Aaliyah nodded thoughtfully, clutching Mr. Trunks to her chest. "Do you think she'll ever be nice to other kids?" "I hope so," Marcus replied. "Sometimes people need a wake-up call to realize how their actions affect others. It's up to them to decide what to do with that realization." Aaliyah seemed satisfied with his answer, but Marcus couldn't shake the thought of Marie. As much as he had been furious with her behavior, he also understood that change required more than just punishment. It required education, understanding, and a willingness to listen. That night, he made a decision. He would reach out to Marie, not as her former employer, but as a person who believed in the possibility of redemption. The next day, Marcus contacted the airline's HR department and requested Marie's contact information. He drafted a letter, carefully choosing his words to convey both his disappointment and his hope for her growth. In the letter, he recounted Aaliyah's experience and the impact it had on her, but he also expressed his belief that people were capable of change. "Marie," he wrote, "what happened on that flight was unacceptable, and I won't pretend it didn't hurt me deeply as both a father and a leader. However, I also believe that this moment can be a turning point, not just for you, but for everyone involved. I invite you to reflect on your actions and to consider how you can use this experience to become a better version of yourself. If you're willing, I'd like to have a conversation with you, not to reprimand, but to understand and to help." He sent the letter, unsure if he would ever receive a response. Weeks passed, and Marcus focused on his work and family. The airline's new initiatives were gaining traction, with employees reporting a renewed sense of purpose and passengers sharing stories of improved service. Aaliyah's Promise, the mentorship initiative named after his daughter, had become a cornerstone of the company's culture, empowering employees to rise through the ranks and creating a more inclusive environment. One afternoon, Marcus received an email from Marie. She had taken time to process his letter and wanted to meet. Her tone was humble and reflective, and she expressed a desire to apologize to both him and Aaliyah. Marcus hesitated, unsure if he should involve his daughter in the meeting, but ultimately decided that it could be a valuable lesson in forgiveness and growth. The meeting was scheduled for a quiet corner of a local cafe. Marcus arrived early, accompanied by Aaliyah, who held his hand tightly. When Marie walked in, she looked markedly different from the poised and polished flight attendant they had encountered on the plane. She seemed nervous, her shoulders slightly hunched, her eyes avoiding theirs at first. But as she approached their table, she straightened, taking a deep breath. "Mr. Carter, Aaliyah," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "thank you for agreeing to meet with me. I owe you both an apology, more than words can probably express." Marcus nodded, gesturing for her to sit. Aaliyah, ever curious, watched Marie closely, her grip on Mr. Trunks loosening just a little. Marie continued, her hands clasped tightly on the table. "I've spent a lot of time thinking about what happened on that flight. I let my own biases and frustrations cloud my judgment, and I treated you, Aaliyah, in a way that no child, or anyone, deserves. It wasn't right, and I'm deeply sorry." Aaliyah glanced up at her father, who gave her an encouraging nod. Turning to Marie, Aaliyah said softly, "It hurt my feelings when you were mean to me. But I forgive you." Marie's eyes filled with tears, and she smiled through them. "Thank you, Aaliyah. That means more to me than I can say." The conversation continued, with Marcus and Marie discussing what had led to her behavior and how she planned to move forward. Marie admitted that she had been struggling with personal challenges and had allowed those struggles to seep into her work. She had since begun attending counseling and had taken steps to address her biases and improve her interactions with others. "I'm not proud of how I acted," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "But I want to do better, and I want to thank you for giving me the chance to make things right." As the meeting came to an end, Marcus felt a sense of closure he hadn't anticipated. He had seen firsthand the power of accountability and the potential for growth, even in the wake of mistakes. As they left the cafe, Aaliyah turned to her father and said, "I'm glad we talked to her, Daddy. It feels better now." Marcus smiled, lifting her into his arms. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." In the weeks that followed, Marie's journey of redemption became part of the broader narrative surrounding the incident. She volunteered to speak at the airline's training sessions, sharing her experience and the lessons she had learned. Her story became a powerful example of the importance of empathy, accountability, and the willingness to change. For Marcus and Aaliyah, life continued with new purpose. They traveled together often, each journey a reminder of the resilience they had built and the love that anchored them. Marcus's leadership at the airline became a model for others, demonstrating that true progress required both bold action and an open heart. And for Aaliyah, the world seemed just a little brighter. She carried with her the knowledge that even in the face of adversity, kindness and forgiveness could pave the way for something better. She still held Mr. Trunks close on every flight, but now, the stuffed elephant wasn't just a source of comfort, it was a symbol of the strength and courage that had carried her through. Their story was no longer just about what had happened on that plane. It was a testament to the power of standing up for what was right, the importance of learning from our mistakes, and the enduring strength of love and forgiveness. It was a story that inspired others to believe in the possibility of change, and to work for a world where everyone, no matter their age, background, or circumstances, was treated with the respect and kindness they deserved.